Namaskaram everyone, welcome to another episode. Today we'll be exploring a really interesting topic. We'll be discussing how mindfulness and XR intersects with each other, how XR is helping in the field of mental health. So we are going to explore how XR is transforming traditional approaches to mindfulness and mental health. So for this really interesting topic, we have Claire. Claire is co-founder and CEO of Haven. She is the former executive director of United Nations Women for UK. She has also been recognized as Women in Innovation for pioneering work on bringing immersive technologies to behavioral and social change. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So just to kick things, can you just tell us more what Haven does?
Absolutely. So you gave me a very kind intro there that said that I came from the UN world into this space. And, I suppose one of my biggest passions is cracking society's most difficult problems that people often think are too embedded to be able to change or affect. And that we believe actually, if we really understand those behavioral patterns, we can change them. So at UN Women, I spent the past 7 years leading the office there and did a lot of work around raising the profile of the issue of sexual harassment and assault to the forefront of public consciousness, especially in the UK. And so that award that we were given of UK public funding was to create a virtual and mixed reality tool to help prevent sexual harassment and assault and teach, police, security guards, schools and communities to prevent that better. And I found it absolutely fascinating, really getting under the skin of how immersive technology, virtual and mixed reality can change neural pathways and change behaviors that we previously thought were very embedded. You can be in environments that you could never be in a traditional setting, that we can't recreate in real life because they're, expensive, geographically impossible, dangerous, risky, etc. So when Haven approached me and said, look, what we're trying to tackle is mental health, I really believe in this cause, and it was such a treat to be able to combine that interest in the power of VR with my other background, which is with another hat on. I own a wellness studio in London. And so I've seen really what you can do in person, but also the limited scale of that. And we had people come in for pain relief, working through their journey after a muscular dystrophy diagnosis, as well as kind of classic mental health issues. And so I just wanted to be able to scale that. And I think what's fascinating about what we've built at Haven is, so we are a platform that allows people to go on and access all sorts of mental health support from, anxiety reduction to depression management to peak performance and, breath work. But I think what's special about the engine that we've built at the center of that is that because it's built on generative AI, it means that instructors, clinicians, yogis, practitioners from all over the world just have to upload a sample of their voice and a session structure, and our engine creates an immersive experience that users can then access. So we are just launching on the Meta Quest store in that process at the moment to the public. And we're also looking at a number of B2B partnerships, both in the healthcare sector and also in kind of brands and hospitality, and bringing those experiences to life. I was excited to join the team at this stage to really commercialize the product. I think that the product is by far the most exciting thing visually and functionality wise in the space. But really, I'm very passionate about how we close that bigger mental health gap. And I think Haven can help do that.
Yeah, it's really great to hear what Haven is doing and what it aims to achieve. So, it is not something which is like a dinner table conversation. We are not talking about it with anyone. So, so do you think that we need to start there, like creating awareness about around mental health, then XR comes into the picture?
I think it's a great question because, awareness around mental health is an interesting concept, isn't it? In a sense, like you say, it's definitely socially stigmatized, and that's changing quickly, but it's still the case in most parts of the world. And at the same time, it's something that many of us will experience. So, 1 in 4 people worldwide, according to the WHO, experiences a diagnosable mental health condition. And that's diagnosable, right? That doesn't include all the people who are just feeling a little bit flat or lonely. And with an aging population and a lot of us spending more and more time alone, that number is growing, and the pandemic made it grow rapidly. And I think the interesting thing with traditional mental health support is that, you know, we have this real blocker around the number of people each clinician is able to treat. So with the current number of mental health practitioners in the world, they typically have a caseload of maybe 20 people, and able to kind of treat 20, maximum maybe 40 clients using technology, right? So if we can connect people using Zoom or VR one-to-one, they could maybe raise that number a little bit to around the 40 range. Now, we would need those people to each be able to treat almost 3,000 clients in order to close that gap to 1 in 4 people. And that number's growing. So the reality is that connecting practitioners and people who need help one-to-one is never going to be able to close the gap. It's impossible. But we also think that it's unnecessary. You know, we've created generative AI tools that mean that from their homes, people actually can take part in sessions that are with, you know, expert therapists and feel personalized to them, are created in ways that will be different every time they take the session, you know, really built around their needs. But we don't need that one-to-one interaction with a therapist all of the time. And so I think there's a really interesting opportunity here to help people access mental health support who aren't perhaps ready or able, for a whole number of reasons, you know, cost, geography, language, social stigma, to go out and get, you know, a counselling session in person or even over the phone. We have very long waiting lists for mental health, you know, public systems, and then in the private sector, it's very expensive. So I think what's interesting is that we have people who have devices in their homes that allow them to be able to access that, but for some reason we haven't taken the opportunity to use those yet. And, you know, we're sitting at a stage in time where it's a little bit like having the iPhone conversation in 2007. We had major newspapers who were printing reports saying the iPhone is just never going to happen. And then here we are, you know, many years later with multiple mobile games that promote mindfulness. So, you know, things that you can interact with that we know have interesting biometric indicators that make people calmer, that are unicorn companies now. You know, we have a whole number of companies who've grown to a huge scale through that mobile boom. And the same will happen with VR. You know, we currently have 80 million headset users in the world already, which is a number that surprises people. They often expect it to be much lower than that. And that number will hugely grow over the next 5 years. So with the Apple headsets coming out and joining the market at a much lower price by around 2026, the number of people who have access to these devices that have until now predominantly be seen as gaming devices in their homes is really going to grow. So I think that we can take that opportunity, particularly with underserved populations in the mental health space. So young people who we know struggle a lot, older people, you know, gamers who may not have that many opportunities for social interaction if their work is largely from home, and developers. Those people really have the opportunity to access support in a way that is accessible, not scary, not super expensive, and in a kind of beautiful gamified environment. So I think that actually it's the awareness piece, but it's also more like, how do we reach those people who currently, the vast majority of people who are struggling with their mental health are not receiving support, and how do we use XR to get it out there?
Yeah. So, the traditional mindfulness practices, which are like therapy, meditation, etc., how can they coexist with XR?
Yeah, look, I think that XR is basically our best available delivery channel for these practices at the moment. There's a lot of research around the immersive nature of XR and how much of an uplift you can get on the impact on people's minds and mental state, as well as on their physiological responses, with XR versus traditional technologies. We also know that mobile apps have very high churn. So a lot of people engaging with popular mindfulness apps on their phone, unfortunately, are not staying. And part of the reason for that is because on your phone, there's so much noise. You know, you're looking at a small screen, you've got everything going around you. We're often double, triple screening. And then on our phone, we have all of these apps, notifications. There's so much clamoring for attention. When you're in an immersive experience using VR or mixed reality, Firstly, it's so much more transformational because you're in a different world. You know, you're creating space and protected time to be able to go through these sessions and really see a full impact from those. Secondly, the nature of the immersion itself is really able to have behavioral impacts in ways far beyond what we can do without that. So you can try different experiences. You can use interactive elements to really learn how to do things like breathwork, meditation, focus, peak performance sessions in a way that just reading that content or being told it, but not being able to practically have the time to practice that, just doesn't have the same impact. So I don't think that it's a competition between traditional practices and XR. You know, as I said, I have a studio here in London, and I think that there will always be a place for in-person connection. You know, I think going along to a class or a therapy session in person is a wonderful thing, but is not accessible to almost everyone in the world for a whole number of reasons. And so being able to combine in-person socialization, but also with the XR technology. And we're building community aspects into the app so that you can still attend a group class with other real people and have that experience together. I think it's a really important way to bring that into people's homes. And, you know, I often compare it to if we had a fitness industry that said that the only way that you could work out was by having, you know, $100 PT sessions one-to-one, nobody would do it, right? But luckily we have home gyms, we have apps that show people how to do a workout, how to go for a run. You know, you're able to go and do that yourselves, whether it's going into a gym and doing that solo or in your home. And that has just opened up the world of fitness and health for so many people, but we haven't done that with the mind yet. So I think a gym for your mind is going to be the next frontier for XR.
Yeah. So what I gauge from you right now is these XR is not going to replace the traditional methods for sure, but it can like really coexist with them and enhance it more.
Yeah, I think it's really a delivery channel for those, you know, it's practitioners who currently might be struggling to find clients, might have a full caseload and not able to take on more, you know, aren't necessarily in the same location as those people and want to spread their learnings and really democratize the access to that, can do that through XR tools. So I think it's, you know, in the same way that once upon a time, I think it would have been hard to imagine the internet being used for reading, for example, but lots of people now consume information there. And I think, you know, in that way, it's the question for us is how do we, as quickly as possible, proliferate mental health support using XR?
Yeah. So what does current research say about the impact of XR and mindfulness on mental health? And what areas need further exploration?
So there's a huge amount of research coming out in this space with some really fascinating findings. And I think, you know, the testing that's taking place is treating mental health in the widest possible way. So that's also really exciting. So we have impacts that we're able to show on people's common conditions, you know, like anxiety, depression, also more less widespread conditions like post-traumatic stress, specific phobias, things like also long-term pain and anxiety surrounding things like surgery, recovery after medical intervention, and things like chemotherapy. We can also provide relief for using XR. We also find that there are some really interesting things around, for example, training people to expand their lung capacity if they have pulmonary issues using virtual reality. You know, so there are these fields that people are doing really pioneering research into just being able to find out that actually there's a really meaningful impact across the mental health space, whether you have quite a specialist issue. You know, there's really fascinating stuff on how virtual reality can support people who have autism and ADHD. And we want to really strengthen the availability of that data in the mixed reality space as well. So on Haven, we're going to be building in mixed reality as part of our next phase. And that allows people to interact in their normal home or, you know, work environment with virtual elements. So whether that's like a virtual sensory room where you can pick up things and play with them, whether you need some space and time away from hustle and bustle because you get overstimulated, you know, a lot of these kind of use cases and challenges that people face, virtual and mixed reality can provide really interesting support for. Now, two areas that I think need further exploration. One is that on the Haven platform, we're really dedicated to integrating non-Western practices in this space. So I think that a lot of the testing that has taken place thus far in academic environments has been around, Western clinical methods, which are super important and very, critical for the healthcare industries. I think we need to be also integrating traditional knowledge from other parts of the world. So I would love to see testing take place, and I hope that we'll be able to do that with Haven, with practices that are age-old from the yoga sphere, for example. Really looking at Eastern meditation and how VR and XR more widely can support that. Bringing indigenous knowledge about our relationship with the world and, meditations on those. I think there are many areas where we should be empowering people around the world who have traditional knowledge and testing with that, and not just kind of allowing most of that testing to take place in the global north or the west, which is more around, therapeutic methods there. So I think that's one thing. I also think an area that needs further exploration is beyond, and this will grow, but beyond these quite specific clinical use cases, how can we help the majority of the population struggling with low mood, work-related stress? There is some testing that's taken place in that area. But again, often the funding is within a clinical environment. And I think the reality is the majority of people struggling with mental health issues are doing that behind closed doors at home. So I would love to see more funding from innovation agencies, from governments, and from big businesses with an interest in this space to really look at how we can affect your average person's mood, because, there have been various attempts at happiness indexes with mixed results. But we know as a global population that with things like climate anxiety, financial crashes, pandemics, conflict, all of this has a huge impact on mental health. And things like mass migration create rises in that as well. And so at Haven, we really want to be testing how can we support, for example, migrant populations of people who've been displaced and are receiving no mental health support, and how does that work? So I still think, there's a lot of very convincing research out there, but there are whole areas where we can do much more.
So now let's also see, are there any examples of XR applications using biofeedback or any other methods to enhance awareness and mindfulness in real time, in those who are seeking mental health help?
Yeah, I think there's some very interesting biofeedback data coming out. So, initial examples of this have been blood pressure, heart rate variability, eye tracking, so pupil dilation as well. And these have shown really interesting results in terms of being able to measure people's mood, their stress levels, and more. At Haven, we've done some initial testing using EEG to measure brain activity. And in the sessions, that's very convincing. So in a very short amount of time, we can see that people's brain activity is positively and meaningfully impacted by taking part in the session. And that's really helpful for us, both understanding, XR applications of mindfulness, but also understanding just the general impacts of mindfulness sessions, right? So being able to integrate with these technologies is helping us to measure that. Where I really want to see more work in this space is, and this is something that I'm kind of really pushing for at Haven and outside, is there are huge numbers of people with fitness trackers now, right? Like that kind of personal ownership of your own health data and really being empowered to know what's happening in your body and mind, and then taking control of that is really opening up. So I also think, yes, VR headsets can do things like eye tracking and pupil dilation. We can do things like hand tracking to see how people are interacting with sessions. But also by integrating with other technologies, we can get so much more rich health data there. So I would love to look at that in a longitudinal way. So not just in the moment, is the session really helping people, but over time, a week later, has it improved their sleep? We can do that, and many apps, including us, are, with things like self-reported depression and anxiety scales. But we need that biofeedback data as well. And so I would love to see more studies that say, a week later, how has that impacted blood pressure? How does repeat use impact that over time? We've seen some studies that show that, 3 years after taking part in training using VR, we still see an impact versus traditional methods. And I think that's incredible. So I would love to see, smarter ways of integrating and connecting up biofeedback data collecting devices with XR. And then also some really good questions around, how do we make sure that the users really own their own data and that that's not being exploited? Because, part of the work that I've done in the past on equality and diversity within, technology and data looks at, it's really important, for example, that if we are allowing women to track their menstrual cycle, that data is not then falling into the hands of companies or even states who have a vested interest in making sure that abortion rates are staying low. And there are many other examples of this, so I think we do need to be very careful, but I think that if we collect that data in the right way, and then really think carefully and have very good regulatory policy and business discussions together on who owns it, I think that has huge potential.
Yeah, and also guessing that this data is also going to help therapists and psychologists in helping those who are seeking professional help.
Yeah, I think it can do hugely, right? Like often as a therapist, a lot of our therapists who we work with tell us that it can be quite disempowering to do, for example, phone or instant message sessions where you don't get that live visual feedback the same way that you would in a room. And, I think it's really important for us to be able to have our practitioners work with that so that they're able, obviously with consent from the users, they're really able to understand like, okay, which parts of my sessions are affecting people in different ways? How is each of these sessions helping somebody with a kind of mild mental health issue and then perhaps with more complex needs? And also for healthcare providers, VR has been shown to be effective in things like de-escalation for people going through a episode of psychosis, for example. And obviously in those kind of cases, we can save a huge amount for healthcare providers and national healthcare systems, but we have to make sure that that's data backed. So I think both for, individual clinicians and then also for providers, it's helping them get helpful, where relevant, anonymized data in a way that they can really understand what impact is this having for us and how much are we saving.
Yeah. So, are there any, we have talked about all the benefits, how it is really good to integrate XR into mental health, but are there any potential risk or things to be considered while integrating XR into mindfulness?
Yeah, so look, I've talked a little bit about data ownership, and I think that
Yeah.
that's a key one. So we want to build this structure very carefully if we're thinking about having, larger and larger numbers of devices in people's homes that are collecting biometric feedback and sending that back to providers or businesses. So I think firstly, the way that data is collected and the consent layers for users, that's a huge consideration. What we don't want ever is, for example, for people's data to be able to be sold to insurance companies and then for them to lose out as a result of positively engaging with these tools. I do think that if that's done in the right way, and access to a platform like ours as part of mindfulness and mental health support should be a benefit that an insurance provider can recognize. It's going to mean less productivity in working days. It's going to be preventative for people's mental health to stop escalation. But I think the darker side of that would be if we got to a place where the devices are collecting data without the user really fully understanding that and then negatively impacting their health journey or what services they have available to them. Equally, I think we will get into very complex territory when the number of headsets out in circulation means that public services and systems are looking to use the data for protecting people. Every time I think there's a very interesting debate around protection to, like, freedom to versus freedom from. So what are you protecting people from and how invasive does that become in their lives? And I think once we start to have conversations, which will come in the next, 10 years, probably 5 years, around if we're able to see crisis indicators or alarming results coming through mental health support apps. And as they get more complex, more advanced, that will happen. Who gets that information? At what point is somebody notified because we want to keep that person safe? But actually we also need to make sure that we're not invading inappropriately in their lives. And so I think that's one that will be very tricky. I think another is that one of the things that we feel very strongly about at Haven is that because the Haven engine and the platform supports expert practitioners from around the world to create their own sessions. We're not just kind of making it up, you know. And I think once these industries really grow and lots of people come into the space and there are lots of players out there, one of the risks is that if you have mental health support information and sessions that are very immersive, that are being created by non-experts and people who aren't qualified practitioners, I think there's a huge risk there. Because if somebody accesses that content who's in a really bad place, or who really needs kind of a specific type of urgent support and they're not signposted to that, I think that can be a risk. So again, I think as this information develops, it's going to be important, especially as we get into more specialist use cases, to make sure that platforms are signposting people to the right support, but that are also really managing that process of two-way feedback very carefully.
Yeah. So, considering the potential for risk and kind of a dependency on XR devices or experiences, how can it be designed to promote healthy usage?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because, look, I don't think we're at the stage yet where we're close to a risk of people being overly addicted to mental health support services. I think at the moment, like the gap to the, you know, the need and the availability is so great that we're a long way off that. But I do think that these sorts of experience can be a bit of an antidote to high intensity, high pressure gaming environments. Certainly, what we're not recommending is that people start to avoid going outside altogether if they previously had that practice in their life. And the reason that Haven is built using natural environments is to really help people reconnect back to nature, especially if they don't have access to it usually. Huge numbers of people in the world actually use XR as their main source of friendship and connection. And I think that's hugely positive. You know, if those people were lacking those things before, like, yes, let's use technological tools to empower that. I think that where we want to be careful is that in immersive environments, even, you know, using mobile phone, social media apps, time passes in a different way. You know what I mean? So you can kind
Yes.
of be on there for 4, 6 hours and feel like 25 minutes has passed in a way that when you're outside and things are moving past you and you hear conversations, generally you're more aware of time passing. So I think that we need to be thinking about, you know, firstly, mental health experiences and typically not going to be 6 hour things, right? But how do we give people like just enough to really get into their day and help them to walk through the world, whether they're using a device or outside in a more positive way, to feel supported, to get injections of regular help into their day. But without saying, you know, now you need to spend all of your time on this and become dependent. And I think mental health and mindfulness support built in the right way should never replace people's ability to cope on their own. It's to really support that, to optimize that, to give us all the tools that most of us don't have to be able to do that better. But I do think that where, you know, there are concerns being raised about young people spending really large number of hours on games that are often quite stressful. You know, most games typically are quite violent. I think actually there we have real work to do to say how can we give access to those people to a gamified experience that is different and will help them, you know, reset their biometric indicators, get a bit of peace and respite, and hopefully actually disconnect a little bit and think about how to integrate that into their day.
So, lastly, what do you think could be the future predictions for this and where it might go?
For XR mental health.
Yes.
So I think this is going to be a huge market. We're looking at the moment, we're standing at a kind of doorway, I think, where virtual and mixed reality is really opening up. And we're still at that point, like I said, you know, we're at the point of mobile phones in 2007 when people are saying, oh, I don't really know if this is going to be a thing. Are we all going to have that square of plastic in our pocket that we carry around all the time? And then look at where we are now, right?
Yeah.
So look, we're talking about a time when, you know, the consumer availability of this is about to grow massively. We have the digital health and wellness market that has, a more than $200 billion valuation now and is projected to reach 780 billion by 2030. And then we have the extended reality market, that has a over 100 billion valuation now. And there'll be 100 million each of VR and AR users by 2027. So by the time we reach 2027, 2030, you know, the number of users of these pieces of technology is going to be enormous. And I think healthcare will pick up on that. You know, right now, customer acquisition costs are still low. The first movers in the space are doing very well. So the apps like Beat Saber and FitXR, who moved first in the physical fitness space, Beat Saber has now turned over $250 million in revenue. FitXR is close behind them. You know, these first movers are seeing huge benefits, but still we're seeing a lot of reticence, I think, to kind of believe in and understand really the potential of this technology. You know, VR is not just for gaming, it's not just the metaverse. It will allow us to integrate training and learning techniques into our day-to-day lives. And of course, headsets will get much cheaper and much less cumbersome very quickly. So my prediction is that I think by 2030, we'll be looking at multiple unicorns in this space in terms of the businesses creating. I think that we'll be looking at a world where immersive experiences are much more baked into our day-to-day lives and are solving a lot of some of society's biggest problems, both for users and then really critically also for business. I expect at Haven a lot of our growth in the next 3 years to come from B2B partnerships, particularly in healthcare. And, you know, I also look at examples like Peloton. You know, that was something that people at first said, well, why would I ever have this piece of equipment in my house? And then look at the growth of that, right? Similarly, Netflix, there was a lot of skepticism originally about a content platform that took rivaling sleep as its mission statement. And actually, you know, it's part of our cultural parlance now. We talk about Netflix and chill, like it's just part of what, you know, the way that we live. And I think we'll certainly see that for XR. I think the question will be who gets into the space at the right time to really be able to lead a market and prove new use cases by the time there are those hundreds of millions of users. And I hope that Haven will be one of those.
Yeah, so true. Like there are sort of doubts around any new tech that is coming in. All right. So to close it off, any last thoughts?
I think my last thought would just be, you know, we don't have to accept a world where we feel fairly unhappy or stressed on a regular basis and we don't do anything about it. You know, so many of us accept that as part of like, well, life's stressful, capitalism's a difficult system, I guess I have to live like this. And I just would like people to be asking for more. So, you know, there are going to be so many technological interventions that help us to learn and then empower us with the knowledge of how to integrate a happier, calmer, less stressed existence into our lives without having to rely on, you know, in those 25 minutes that I have with a therapist, I feel good. And then when I leave, I'm like, oh, I've got to drag myself through the week till the next one. So yeah, I would really love people to believe that feeling unhappy is not okay. And B, realize that yes, we all have struggles, we all go through difficult times in life to greater and lesser extents, but there are tools available to help that. And so I would love for the healthcare industry to really see the power of preventative mental health care and not just waiting till people have a crisis, because I think that'll be the future of mental health.
So true, so true. All right. So thank you for joining us here and sharing your knowledge with us. It was really helpful for me, especially as well. So yeah, thank you for joining us here and taking your time out.
Great to meet you. Thanks so much for having me. Take good
Thank you.
care.
Thank you. Namaskaram.